Hey guys, tonight we're climbing aboard a creaking Roman warship late in the campaign season. Sails furled, oars out, and the stench. Let's just say your nose will not thank you. You're an oarsman, low-ranked and lower paid, packed shoulder to shoulder with 170 other sweating, swearing souls. And tonight, you're getting sick. Fast. So grab your ration of sour wine and brace yourself because you probably won't survive this voyage. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also drop your city and what time it is where you are. I love seeing how far this sleepy little crew of ours sails every night. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up sweating, even though the sea air is crisp. Your head pulses like it's been stomped by a centurion's boot. Your throat's raw, your stomach churns, and the usual stench of bilge mildew and sailor feet suddenly smells sharp. Too sharp. You gag. You're leaning over the edge of your oar bench before you can even curse the gods. There's no break. The beat of the drum pounds in your skull, left-right pull, and your forearms burn. Someone behind you shouts to keep pace. You try. You fail. You miss the rhythm, and your oar clanks awkwardly against the sea. That earns you a swift cuff on the back of the head from a nearby deck officer who calls you something that translates roughly to lazy donkey liver. You retch again, dry this time. There's not much in your stomach. Last night's meal was 2-day-old lentil mush and a stale barley biscuit. Probably not the culprit, though. Everyone else ate the same thing. You're the only one turning a queasy shade of olive green. No one cares that you're sick. This is a Roman warship. Sickness isn't a reason to stop rowing. It's a reason to get yelled at more quietly. If you die, someone else will grab your oar before you're cold. And yes, they'll probably still be able to feel your body heat. You whisper a prayer to Asclepius under your breath. It can't hurt. Unless, of course, the guy next to you hears and thinks you're inviting bad luck. Then he might just push you overboard. Sailors are famously chill like that. You scan the deck for any sign of help. The ship's medicus. Not here. He's probably dozing up top with the officers or playing dice in the shade of a sail. You meanwhile are slowly melting into your tunic, which is soaked from equal parts seawater sweat, and now a splash of whatever bile you just heaved. As the sun climbs, things get worse. Your fever spikes. The sweat gets cold. You start hallucinating slightly, at least you hope that's a hallucination. Did the guy in front of you just grow donkey ears? Historically, Roman naval hygiene wasn't a priority. They knew water carried disease, but didn't fully understand why. Ships were damp, dirty, and crawling with lice. The latrine was a shared rope dangling over the side, and God's help you if you slipped. You once heard about a guy who fell in during a storm and was never seen again, except in ghost stories sailors told to new recruits. Scholars still argue whether the Romans recognized infections as we do. Some believe they knew wounds turned worse in unclean conditions, but chalked it up to imbalances of bodily humors. You're pretty sure your humors are all screaming at once. You try to fake rowing. Just enough movement to look alive, but not enough to hurl again. Your hands blister. Your knees lock. Every jolt of the ship sends a wave of nausea crashing through you. You close your eyes and imagine lying on a cool marble floor somewhere dry and quiet. Somewhere without rats the size of kittens, or sailors spitting off the edge every 10 seconds. Just as you think you might actually die, someone tosses you a rag. It's damp and smells faintly of vinegar. Wipe your face, the voice grunts. You look like you've been dead 2 days. You do as told, thankful for even that scrap of kindness. Then the drum beats again. Left-right pull. Left-right pull. You row through the fever. You lose track of time somewhere between the 5th wave of dry heaves and the second time someone steps over you to get to their oar. You're not even rowing anymore. Your slumped arms dangling, barely swaying in rhythm. The man next to you finally mutters, "Stop making the rest of us look weak," and shoves you upright. Your spine protests with a crack like old timber. Everything's hot and bright and spinning. Eventually, someone not out of kindness, but to keep the ship moving, grabs your arms and drags you up toward the deck. You stumble like a drunk goat, barely managing not to tip straight over the railing. Below deck, the rowing rhythm pounds on without you. Up here, it's no better. The sun is blinding. The deck reeks of fish tar and sweat. You squint toward the bow and see a cluster of officers pretending you don't exist. But one sailor older, grizzled with a scar running from ear to chin, jerks his thumb toward a pile of tangled ropes. "Lie down." "Not there," he says, pointing again with zero patience. "Don't puke on the sailcloth." You collapse into the ropes. They're coarse and soaked with salt water. You cough again. Your throat feels like sandpaper and your nose is bleeding. Great, that's new. Either you've developed plague or the gods are just messing with you now. Here's the thing, Roman warships weren't designed with sickbay in mind. If you were lucky, the ship might carry a medicus, but he was probably trained more in battlefield wounds than in, say, dysentery or heat stroke. You remember once hearing him brag about treating a spear wound by packing it with honey and goose fat. Probably not super useful right now, if he even shows up. Eventually he does. Sort of. A thin, sharp-nosed man in a stained tunic crouches beside you, pinches your wrist like he's checking your pulse, or maybe just wondering if you're worth the trouble, and then mutters something about bile and imbalances. He waves a cloth under your nose, soaked in vinegar and myrrh. You nearly gag again. He squints. Heat fever, he says, like he's diagnosing a broken table leg, or bad water, or curse. Rest, don't die. That's it. No herbs, no charms, no helpful ancient remedies involving fermented fish sauce and crushed beetles. Just don't die. Historians still debate how effective Roman naval medicine actually was. Some argue they adapted battlefield techniques, cauterizing wounds with hot irons and binding sores with lead-based salves. Others believe most sailors were expected to just tough it out, and anyone who didn't was dumped overboard the next time they slowed the crew. Your fever breaks the next morning, maybe from the vinegar fumes, maybe because your body's just too stubborn. But the aftermath. Oh, it's not victory. It's weakness. Everything aches. You can't sit up without the world tilting. The ship rocks endlessly, the oars slap the sea, and you want to crawl into a water jar and stay there. You overhear two crewmen whispering about your collapse. "I saw his eyes roll back," one says. "He was halfway to Hades." The other nods solemnly. Bad omen. Means the winds'll turn. Superstition on Roman ships runs thicker than fish stew. If you sneeze at the wrong time, it's a bad sign. If a raven lands on the mast, it's a warning. If someone gets violently ill, that's the gods, my friend, and someone better make an offering. Preferably you. You offer up your own personal prayer, not out loud, not after last time, but it's a weird one. Something between, "Please let me live," and "Please don't let me fall off this floating death trap before I get paid." Food's no comfort. Rations are rationed. You manage a bowl of thin gruel with a strip of pickled turnip that tastes like sadness. But it stays down. That's progress. By nightfall, you're back at the oars. Sort of. You pull slowly, carefully. No one yells. Not out of mercy, but because they don't want to be next. Sickness has a smell, and it lingers. And nobody wants to catch whatever boiled eel demon is living inside you. The moon rises over the water, and the ship glides silently between stars. It should be beautiful. You should be grateful. But mostly you're just hoping you don't keel over again mid-row. Because on a Roman warship, there's no such thing as a sick day. You're barely 3 strokes into your shift the next day, when your arms begin trembling again. The kind of tremble that starts in your fingers and ripples up to your shoulders like you're a harp string about to snap. Everyone's rowing in time, except you. The guy behind you is mouthing curses, and the overseer is pacing with a rope in hand, which is his version of subtle motivation. You do your best. You really do. But your body isn't bouncing back. Whatever made you sick, heat, bad water, cursed fish, still has you in its grip. Your muscles feel like boiled grain, and even your thoughts are starting to smear around the edges. It's like your mind is fogged glass, and you can't quite remember how many days you've been at sea. Food comes again, if you can call it that. Hardtack, salted fish, warm water that somehow still tastes like copper. Roman naval rations were famously bare bones. One standard was dried legumes boiled until they dissolved into sludge. Your body craves anything else. Fruit clean water, the mild dignity of a fig. But you're stuck with this flavorless paste that tastes like someone boiled old coins in rainwater. You hear one sailor mutter that you've been cursed by Neptune himself. Another claims it's because you stepped over a coil of rope with your left foot first. Ancient Roman sailors believed in signs, omens, and rituals, like they believed in salt, always necessary. There were things you simply didn't do on a ship: cut your hair, whistle into the wind, or speak the name of the dead. You vaguely remember someone spitting on the deck yesterday and getting slapped. Sailors do not play when it comes to maritime taboos. You're lying back again, having managed a full half hour at the oar before your body gave out. This time, the medicus doesn't come. Instead, it's the cook. He's carrying a small pouch of dried herbs tied with rough twine and a chunk of wax. For the stomach, he says, as if that clears things up. He tosses the bundle on your chest and walks off. You stare at it for a good minute before realizing it smells like fennel and crushed mint, and maybe something a bit moldy. You chew it anyway. It tastes like licorice and dirt. Some historians believe Roman sailors made use of native remedies, garlic, onion vinegar, and cumin, being popular choices for treating everything from coughs to curses. You remember hearing that cumin rubbed on the temples could cure fevers, though others swore it summoned evil dreams. Historians still argue whether these makeshift treatments were medical magical or somewhere frustratingly in between. The ship halts briefly near a rocky outcrop coastal resupply, they say, but it feels more like a mercy pause. Some sailors rush to piss over the side. Others just sit and blink, grateful not to be rowing. A few disappear into the hills to fetch water from a spring. You envy them. And then there's the sea. Vast, glinting, endless. It mocks you. With every heave of the ship, your stomach lurches. You're no longer vomiting, but your body keeps acting like it wants to. The sensation is somehow worse than actually throwing up. You're resting against a barrel now, empty sadly, and listening to a man nearby describe the time a lightning bolt struck a trireme and melted the bronze fittings. The whole front end just melted, he says, gesturing wide with his hands, like cheese over a brazier. He glances at you. Probably happened because someone sick touched the prow. You try to chuckle. It comes out as a dry wheeze. A junior officer walks past and pauses. Feeling better, he asks, tone neutral, but eyes sharp. You nod. Not because it's true, but because you don't want to be thrown overboard. He snorts. Good. We need every hand. The wind's turning. He walks off. You lie still, eyes fluttering shut. Night falls again, and the temperature dips. There's no blanket, so you use your own arms crossed over your chest, like a poorly mummified Egyptian noble. You fall asleep to the creak of timbers and the faint sound of someone vomiting over the side. Finally, someone else. Misery, as they say, loves company. You dream of walking on land again, of a full meal, of lying on a bed that isn't made of wet rope and regrets. But mostly you dream of not being sick anymore, of being whole, of not being the cursed sailor no one wants to stand near. Tomorrow maybe you'll pull your full shift, or maybe not. Either way, the ship sails on. By morning, you've acquired a new nickname, the Limp Dolphin. You're not sure who coined it, but it's spreading faster than the fever in your bloodstream. Even the cook snickers when you pass. On Roman warships, mockery is just another way to bond. Unfortunately, you're the campfire tonight. You try to laugh along, but your stomach has its own opinions. It somersaults with a flair that would impress a circus acrobat. You lean over the side, just in time for a weak retch. Nothing comes up but bile and a single tiny fish scale. You stare at it, like it holds secrets. Maybe it does. Down in the bilge, a storage amphora has cracked. The scent of pickled olives and mold wafts up, mixing with the sea spray and sweat. It's somehow worse than vomit. You wonder if this is what dying in slow motion feels like, somewhere between nausea and being a punchline. One sailor older and missing most of his teeth takes pity. He offers you a clove of garlic. Chew it slow, he says. Burns out the bad spirits. You do. It's like chewing fire, but it jolts your senses. Romans believed garlic had medicinal properties, warding off illness and evil alike. Some even rubbed it on their feet or wore it around their necks. And yet historians still argue whether these folk remedies were based on observation-blind faith or just ancient placebo effect. You chew eyes-watering. Your head clears a bit. That afternoon, the ship hits rough water. Not a storm, just wind strong enough to make the trireme groan like a dying akka. Oarsmen start singing to keep rhythm, their voices raw and hoarse. The chant is low, rhythmic, ancient, something about Mars, blessing the iron of their blades, and Poseidon staying drunk enough to leave them alone. You try humming along, but you're offbeat and out of tune. During one particularly nasty swell, the boat lurches and a barrel rolls loose. It slams into a man's leg with a dull crunch. He screams the medicus comes, and just like that, there's someone worse off than you. The man is hauled up, leg wrapped in linen, soaked in wine, and laid next to you like a casualty of war. You offer him a sip of your water. He takes it wincing. Could be worse, he mutters. We could be in Germania. You both chuckle even though the joke doesn't really make sense. Overhead seabirds circle. A sailor swears one is an omen of good luck. Another insists it means death is near. The ship's cat-fat and smug prowls the deck like it owns the fleet. You watch it with envy. It doesn't row. It doesn't vomit. It just naps, stretches, and occasionally bats a rat into the sea. You lie back again and close your eyes. The sun is sharp today, casting light so bright you can see the red of your own eyelids. Your fever's lower, but not gone. And now, your joints are aching knees. Elbows, even your fingers, feel like they're slowly being unscrewed. You remember someone mentioning that scurvy starts that way. Then again, you also remember someone else saying scurvy turns your gums black and makes your teeth fall out. So who knows? Historians still debate how much ancient sailors truly understood about nutrition. Some argue they recognized signs of deficiency and compensated with sour wine or whatever greens they could forage. Others think most crews simply got sick, suffered, and hoped for land before their molars gave up. That night a rat dies on deck. Just flops over mid-scurry. No one touches it. Some whisper that it's an ill omen. Others say it just ate bad fish. You're not sure which is more disturbing. You wrap a scrap of spare linen around your neck, trying to warm up. The chill comes quickly after sunset. The stars begin to prick through the purple sky, and somewhere in the distance, thunder mutters low over the sea. You try not to think about what it would mean if your sickness got worse, if your limbs went numb, if you started to hallucinate more than usual anyway. You've already seen one sailor carried to the edge and gently rolled into the sea, wrapped in canvas without a word. A splash, a prayer, and then silence. You're not ready for that. You're still fighting, barely. Sleep comes in fragments stolen in 10-minute bursts between shivering fits and sudden stomach flips. You drift off to the creak of timber and wake to the sound of boots slapping the deck, then drift again, while a nearby sailor hums something that sounds suspiciously like a funeral dirge. Maybe it is. By dawn, you're not sure if you've slept or hallucinated a full conversation with the ship's cat. You think its name is Magnus now. It judged your life choices harshly and walked away. Today's weather is cruel, no storms, but a blinding heat that turns the deck into a frying pan. The sun reflects off the sea like 1,000 tiny knives stabbing your eyes every time you try to sit up. Someone hands you a strip of cloth to cover your face, soaked in stale vinegar. Roman sailors used vinegar not just for cleaning wounds, but to cool their skin and ward off insects. You tie it over your eyes like a makeshift sleep mask from a nightmare spa. Your fever breaks sometime after mid-morning. You wake drenched, trembling, and slightly less like a human sponge. A sailor pats your shoulder. Still with us, good. We had a bet. They don't say who bet against you. Food is offered a mix of dried figs, flatbread, and something fishy you don't bother to identify. You nibble like a squirrel and almost weep with joy when it stays down. Victory. Small, sad, soggy, but still. Down below, one of the new recruits starts coughing wet hollow and unmistakably bad. Everyone notices, but no one says anything. On a Roman warship, illness is a team sport, and silence is sometimes survival. The term quarantine doesn't exist yet, but the instinct to back away. That's universal. One of the more experienced crew members, nicknamed Goat because of his unfortunate beard, slips a pouch of crushed herbs into the recruit's hand. You recognize the smell, Fennel Bay, something bitter. Roman medicine wasn't entirely useless. They knew how to mask pain-ease coughs, even slow infections. Some of their treatments were surprisingly effective. Others, well, let's just say some folks swore by mouse dung ointment, and historians still argue whether that was medical insight or desperate superstition. As the day wears on, you're strong enough to walk, if only a few wobbly steps at a time. You cling to the rail, squinting at the sea. Far off land teases the horizon a smudge of green and gold. The mood on board shifts. Even the oarsmen chant louder. A merchant aboard begins preparing his crates, olive oil, ceramics, garum. You catch a whiff of that fermented fish sauce and nearly relapse on the spot. He laughs, offers you a sniff of frankincense instead. Much better. 3 days, maybe less, he says. Then you kiss the dirt and swear off boats forever. You try smiling. It's mostly teeth and exhaustion. But then, mid-afternoon, a warning call comes from the crow's nest. Sails 3, maybe 4, on the edge of visibility. Enemy pirates. The ship erupts into a flurry of movement. Orders are barked, sails trimmed, weapons checked. Suddenly, your fever doesn't seem like the worst thing that could happen today. You're told to stay down. Not helpful. There's nowhere safe on a Roman warship when trouble comes knocking. But it turns out to be a false alarm. Merchant vessels slow and fat, drifting like lazy sheep. The ship's commander curses the wasted adrenaline and slaps someone for fun. Laughter returns, sharp-edged and relieved. Night falls again. You curl into a coil of spare rope, now feeling more human than wreckage. Your stomach rumbles, which feels almost hopeful. You're not healed, but you're no longer dying on the deck like driftwood with a pulse. You watch the stars for a while, marveling that ancient Romans navigated by them, using knowledge passed down from Etruscans and Greeks. There's a strange beauty in how the same stars watched Julius Caesar cross the sea, and now they watch you try not to puke in your sleep. Cosmic equality. Just before sleep claims you, a voice murmurs beside you. You'll miss this one day. You snort, doubt it. But part of you, very small and very tired, wonders if they might be right. Morning rolls in with the scent of tar sweat and slightly less fear. You've survived another night, and miraculously you wake up without that persistent metallic taste in your mouth. Your body feels like it's been through 7 rounds with a minotaur, but the fever has finally loosened its grip. Someone brings you watered-down wine, not because they're suddenly generous, but because you're still a liability if you pass out mid-vomit near the oar-deck. Romans diluted their wine heavily, especially for lower-class crew. Undiluted wine was considered barbaric, uncivilized, a thing for Gauls, and frat boys, apparently. You sip it slowly, letting the coolness coat your sore throat. It's not ambrosia, but it's not goat urine either. Progress. By now, the crew has mostly stopped pretending you might keel over any second. A few slap your shoulder in passing. One hands you a piece of dried plum, which is code for you're not cursed anymore. High praise. You wobble across the deck, guided by the familiar sway beneath your feet. It's strange how the sea which tried to kill you days ago now feels like it's helping you stay upright. You lean against the balustrade and watch a dolphin pod trailing the ship. They leap in arcs, carefree, and obnoxiously healthy. Good omen, someone says, nodding at the dolphins. Means smooth sailing. Or maybe they're just here for the free fish guts, but hey, let's not ruin the magic. Below deck, though, things aren't improving as much. The recruit with the cough. He's not up here. You hear murmurs? His breathing's ragged. He's not waking properly. No doctors on board, only whatever wisdom the oldest sailors carry, like battle scars. One of them insists it's the ship's lung, a term tossed around for all sorts of respiratory doom. No one agrees on the cause. Some blame mold in the grain stores. Others bad sea air or divine punishment for swearing too much during storms. Historians still argue whether it was truly pneumonia bronchitis or just a catch-all term for anything wet and deadly that didn't involve swords. You overhear a plan to keep him on deck more fresh air, less damp. Someone's boiling pine resin to rub on his chest. Smells like a forest fire, but you appreciate the effort. Later, during a rare moment of quiet, a centurion approaches. His older face lined like tree bark, eyes sharp. He squats beside you, chewing something bitter-smelling. Been on ships 20 years, he says. You either learn to love the sickness or outlive it. You laugh. What if you do neither? He shrugs. Then you become a story sailors whisper about when the wind's wrong. Comforting. The conversation drifts to why you're here at all. Not many board warships for fun. You spin a tale family duty, a trade mission, Gar, and sideways vague mentions of someone important back home. He nods uninterested. Everyone's story here is half true and half self-preservation. The day ends with the distant outline of land growing clearer. Trees, cliffs, smoke curling from a shoreline settlement. You can almost smell real food. Port is maybe a day away too if the wind plays tricks. Night comes, and you join the crew for a shared meal, lentils garum, and a boiled egg that's seen better weeks. The talk is light, the mood calmer. Someone strums a stringed instrument with more heart than skill. A young sailor sings a song in Greek about a sea nymph who lures sailors to their doom. Everyone chimes in on the chorus badly, and you, still pale, still weak, but standing, actually laugh. The world doesn't spin when you move your head. Your ribs ache, but only from coughing, not dying. And that's enough. Up above, the stars return. You spot a familiar pattern, Orion, or what the Romans called the hunter. He's always armed, always hunting, always watching. Maybe he's keeping an eye on you too. You lie back on the deck, not even minding the creak of wood or the stink of nearby boots. This ship, for all its misery, is beginning to feel a little like home. The kind of home you complain about constantly, but still defend if anyone else insults it. Tomorrow you might set foot on land. Tomorrow you might get answers, medicine, maybe even a bath. But for now, you let your eyes close to the lull of water against wood, to the slow rock of the sea, to the knowledge that somehow you've lasted longer than most would have guessed. You wake to shouting, not panicked this time, just loud and annoyingly chipper. The lookout has spotted a port, and the ship shifts with sudden purpose. There's a new kind of buzz on deck, not dread, but anticipation. You drag yourself up joints creaking like poorly maintained hinges and peer ahead. Land. Actual, solid, merciful land. A Roman port city fringed with limestone docks and squat buildings. Smoke curls from bakeries' sails flutter from other anchored ships, and figures bustle on the shoreline like ants that got too ambitious with urban planning. There's still no such thing as sick leave on a Roman warship. But there is the sacred ritual of shore time. Repairs need doing. Trade needs handling. And let's be honest, half the crew is dreaming of wine women, or at least dry bread without wormholes. But before any of that, the ship must be secured, the cargo accounted for, and the gods appeased. A small altar is brought forward, portable, unimpressive, but functional. The crew gathers while an offering of barley and oil is burned. You join them because even if you're not devout, you're not stupid. You whisper a quick thanks not to any specific deity, but maybe to Fortuna, the goddess of luck. She seems the most likely culprit behind your survival. A senior officer strolls past and gives you a once-over. Still alive, I see. You nod, barely. That's more than I expected. Good. You'll help unload the barrels. So much for divine reward. As the gangplank thuds down, the scent of harbor life overwhelms you. Salt fish, olive oil, sweat, and what can only be described as goat logic. You step onto the dock like a man reborn, knees wobbly, but spirit unwilling to collapse in front of so many well-fed locals. The ship's physician. Yes, suddenly there is one now that you're not dying. Pulls you aside. He pokes at your ribs, checks your breath, sniffs your sweat like he's sampling fine cheese. He concludes that you're probably cured. Probably. You nod and take the paper. He scribbles your name on either a treatment record or a death list. Who knows? Then it's off to the storehouse, hauling amphorae with the rest of the crew. Not glamorous, but compared to shivering in fevered agony in the bilge, it's practically a holiday. The local slaves mutter in a dialect you don't recognize, and you wonder if their job is worse or better than yours. Probably better. At least they're not on floating plague ships. Lunch is issued bread, olives, cheese hard enough to defend yourself with. You eat sitting on a crate, staring out at the sea that nearly ended you. It doesn't look so bad now. Blue. Peaceful. Smug. As the sun dips low, you're given leave. You wander through the town, slow and hunched, but breathing. The streets buzz with merchants hawking tin and garum children chasing dogs. Roman citizens doing their best impression of being too important to notice you. You find a fountain and splash water on your face. It's cold and glorious. You even stumble upon a healer's stall herbs strung up like fish oils in clay jars. A woman with silver bracelets and an attitude that suggests she's not impressed by your sailor stench. You trade a wooden token for a jar of something labeled pectoral balm. It smells like honey and death. You buy it anyway. Night finds you back on board. The ship's quieter now. The sick recruit with the lung cough. He's not coming back. Word spreads he died at a temple hospice inland. No one says it aloud, but you all feel it, that odd mix of guilt and relief. One less bunkmate. One less reminder of what nearly took you, too. You sit on deck as stars emerge, stomach full, chest clearer. Legs sore but stable. Someone plays a reed flute. The melody's off-key, but calming. You're not sure what's next, another journey. Another battle, maybe discharge if you play your fever card right. But for now, you're afloat alive, and no longer contagious. Historians still argue whether Roman ships had organized medical protocols, or if it was mostly superstition and seawater. Your experience suggests the latter with a sprinkle of dumb luck. And maybe, just maybe, the gods weren't entirely asleep. You lean back, eyes closing, as the sea laps against the hull, like a lullaby with bad timing. And just before sleep pulls you under, you whisper a promise to yourself: next time, pack more garlic. Morning breaks, soft and golden, glinting off the calm harbor waters like scattered coins. You stretch beneath your thin wool blanket, joints cracking in protest. You survived the sickness. You made it through a Roman warship's worst-case scenario. Congratulations. You've officially joined the elite club of men who didn't die in the bilge. But your reward isn't retirement, or even an extended nap. The trireme needs resupplying. Amphorae must be hoisted back on board, rations checked, and a few of the oars replaced with ones that don't splinter under pressure, like your ego. The centurion barks orders with the enthusiasm of someone who never once coughed up bile in a rowing bench. You obey mostly because refusing earns you latrine duty. Still, something's shifted. Your crewmates, once dismissive, now nod when you pass. One even shares a stale fig cake. It's like battlefield camaraderie, except the battlefield was your own digestive tract. You glance around the port one more time. The healer's stall is already gone, packed up at dawn. The city's coming to life again, carters yelling, fishmongers swatting flies, someone somewhere roasting lamb over coals. For a flicker of a second, you imagine deserting. Just walking off, vanishing into some back alley bathhouse with a fake name and a fresh start. But you've still got years on your conscription. And the Roman military isn't known for its leniency toward deserters. So you haul the next amphora heavy and sloshing and whisper your goodbyes to the idea of freedom. Once the ship is loaded, a priest comes aboard to bless the voyage. You're handed a laurel sprig. Tradition. You tuck it behind your ear, trying not to laugh when the man next to you does the same, and instantly sneezes. Blessings don't help if you're allergic to your own good luck. The crew lines up, roll call echoes, and before long, the ropes are hauled in. The ship eases out of harbor like a beast reluctantly returning to its cage. Seabirds follow for a bit, hoping for crumbs. Then they vanish into the blue. Your stomach gurgles. It's a familiar feeling, but not sickness this time. Hunger. You take that as a victory. Below deck things are marginally improved. The galley slaves scrubbed the hold. The bad air is less bad. Someone even hung a satirical charm, shaped like a fish with tiny wings supposed to ward off illness. Or cause it. No one can remember. And you, once a crumpled, fever-drenched wreck, are now a functioning cog again. Not quite shiny, but turning. You settle into your bench. The rhythm returns. Stroke, pull, gasp, curse, repeat. You overhear talk of the next destination, possibly Sicily, or maybe another surprise barbarian coast. Historians still argue whether Roman naval planning was strategic genius or just extremely enthusiastic guessing. Either way, it's happening again. At night, you press your cheek against the warm wood of the deck, listening to the groan of the hull and the slap of the sea. You feel the echo of your fever in your bones, like a ghost that hasn't fully left. And yet, you're different. You've stared down one of the worst things that can happen at sea, and crawled back out with your humor intact, and possibly some lung damage. You're no longer just a rower or soldier or random body with a number. You're the guy who puked into a helmet, hallucinated about dying in a goat cart, and lived to joke about it. Someone hands you a cup of diluted wine. It's warm, slightly vinegary, and tastes like victory. Now slow down with me. The wind softens and the sea at last turns calm. The stars above are clearer now, as if even the sky has exhaled. You lie there no longer shivering or sweating, no longer afraid the next breath might be your last. The ship rocks gently beneath you, cradling you like something that maybe, just maybe, doesn't want to kill you anymore. You made it. Against the odds, through salt and sickness, through sleepless nights, and silent prayers you endured. And now you rest. For tonight at least, the sea lets you. So close your eyes. Let the soft creak of the hull and the hush of waves carry you somewhere quiet. Somewhere warm. Somewhere far from Roman warships and strange-smelling herbs. You're safe now. Sweet dreams. Hey guys, tonight we're stepping straight into the rank-smelling, straw-stuffed boots of the youngest page in a Crusader castle. The year somewhere in the late 1100s. The place, a stone fortress on the rocky edge of the Holy Land, where the walls are thick, the chores are endless, and your odds of a good day are, let's be honest, non-existent. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're 12 skinny, and your name's been forgotten since your first day here. They just call you boy, or worse rat. Every morning, before even the roosters dare to squawk, you're already being yanked from your lumpy straw bed by an older squire's boot to the ribs. Your job: start the fires, muck the stables, and haul buckets of water up a winding stone staircase designed by someone who clearly hated feet. The water has to be cold, straight from the well, and it better not slosh. Sir Bertrand does not tolerate wet floors, mainly because he walks barefoot before dawn for spiritual reflection. His spiritual toe once slipped on a puddle, and now you've been on thin ice ever since. You trudge to the stables where 3 war horses snort steam into your face. One of them, charmingly named Lucifer, nips your arm every time you try to feed him. The hay you carry scratches your neck. The muck soaks into your boots. And yes, you forgot to patch the hole in your left sock again. You might as well not even be wearing one. Historians still argue whether boys your age were ever given proper footwear, or if you just inherited whatever fell off another kid's corpse. By the time the knights wake, you're already onto your 5th chore, shaking out their cloaks, folding tunics stiff with dried sweat, and scrubbing crusted food off their wooden trenchers. They yell if you scrub too loud, and they yell if you don't scrub fast enough. It's a real skill learning how to clean while tiptoeing in fear. And no, you're not allowed to use the castle lavatory. That's for knights. You get the bushes outside the walls. Be quick about it, though. Last time you got spotted by a patrolling archer who threatened to pin your backside to a tree for target practice. You think about your family sometimes, mostly your mother's stew, and the dog who liked you more than your older brother did. But you're here now, a ward of the Lord, which is basically code for unpaid, overworked babysitter, janitor, and errand boy, rolled into one undersized body. You were sent here for training, but it's unclear if that means martial training, or just how to survive 12 straight hours of punishment without crying. By noon, your tunic is soaked in sweat, your fingers are raw from hauling firewood, and your stomach hasn't stopped growling since yesterday. You get a moment's rest by the chapel door, where you're meant to reflect on your sins. You mostly reflect on the blisters forming under your toenails. Here's a quirky bit. Every page in your position is assigned a goose. Yes, a real live goose. Not for protection, not for food, just tradition. You're supposed to train it to follow you everywhere. Yours pecks you when you're not looking, and once ran off with a piece of your lunch bread. Legend says the lord of the castle once made his goose attend a knighting ceremony. Dignified. Meanwhile, the master-at-arms walks by and growls that you'd better be in formation by the afternoon bell, or else it's stable duty for a week, again, as if you ever left. Every day is like this. Same smells, same burns on your fingertips, same goat who stares at you like it knows you're going to break down and cry behind the well tonight. And the worst part, you're not even halfway through the day. After a barely warm barley mash lunch that smells suspiciously like horse feed, you line up in the dirt courtyard under the cracked gaze of the Virgin Mary carved into the stone wall. It's weapons drill time, and even though you're not allowed to touch anything sharp yet, you're expected to watch very closely. With wide eyes and trembling legs, you observe older squires clanging swords, buckling helms, and showing off. One of them is missing 2 fingers, which is apparently normal. You don't get a wooden sword, not yet. You get a stick, a crooked, splintery stick. It's twice your height, and definitely wasn't cut with any kind of symmetry in mind. Your job is to practice posture. This means standing still with your feet just so back, straight shoulders level. For hours. If your stick wobbles or you slouch, the training master whacks your legs with the flat of a real blade. The trick is to flinch just slightly faster than his swing. There's a boy beside you named Elric who keeps fainting in the sun. You're not sure if it's the heat or the anxiety, but you whisper encouragement when the instructor's back is turned. Aelric once snuck you an extra heel of bread when your goose stole your supper. He's a hero. Occasionally, the older boys practice tilting charging at a dummy with a blunted lance while riding one of the scarier horses. One kid, Thomas, once missed and speared a chicken. You laughed and then had to do extra latrine duty for a week. Still worth it. There's something awful about the way sweat and dirt mix into mud in your boots. You try not to think about how long it's been since you bathed properly. Historians still argue whether pages ever bathed more than once a month, though accounts differ wildly. Some chronicles describe ritual bathing before feast days. Others suggest that as long as you didn't smell like you were dying, you were fine. A bell tolls. Everyone freezes. A messenger arrives, an older man with a long beard and an unreadable expression bearing a scroll sealed in crimson wax. The Lord's son is to join a patrol down the valley road. That means you must pack his saddlebag. You run as fast as your aching feet allow and return with dried meat, wet stone-waxed cloth, and the lucky talisman he never actually remembers to wear. As you cinch the bag shut, a knight claps you on the back with the force of a brick wall. If it's not packed right, boy, and his blade rusts, you'll be drinking bathwater from the privy for a week. You laugh nervously, but you're pretty sure that's not a joke. Back in the armory, you're ordered to polish a suit of mail. A full suit. Each ring of metal is packed with grime, and your cloth is already threadbare. The smell of old sweat clings to the inside, like regret. You scrub anyway, dreaming of bread with actual butter, or maybe the sound of your mother's singing. You're 12, but sometimes you feel 100. At least once a week, a knight tells you a war story, usually involving gore glory and heroic last stands. You're expected to listen in awe, though half of you suspects they're exaggerated. Did Sir Aldred really hold off 50 Saracens alone? Or was it more like, 4 historians still argue whether these battlefield tales were mostly propaganda, or if some knights really were that insane? As the sun dips casting amber over the dusty courtyard, you're finally dismissed from drills. Your arms ache. Your legs wobble. You smell like everything except a human child. Aelric throws a pebble at your back and grins. You didn't fall over this time. You grin back. Small wins. You shuffle off to your next assignment, shadowing the castle cook. This sounds promising, until you realize shadowing means chopping root vegetables until your fingers go numb. The cook smells of onions and rage. He once chased a squire around the kitchens with a ladle. You don't ask why. That night's meal is thin stew and a chunk of hard bread that cracks your tooth. At least it's warm, and for a moment as you sit near the kitchen hearth, Goose sleeping at your feet, you allow yourself a full breath. You survived another day. But the bell for night watch is only an hour away. It's well past dark when a cold metallic clang yanks you from your half-sleep. No, that wasn't a dream. That's the bell tower, 3 slow tolls. Night watch again. You groan softly, trying not to wake the goose curled beside you. She honks once in protest as you pull on your rough woolen tunic, now stiff with yesterday's sweat. Your hands fumble in the dark for your boots, which never quite dried from your earlier misstep into the moat's edge. You slip out into the night, breath puffing in little white clouds. The torches along the ramparts flicker violently in the wind, casting long shadows that make the statues of saints look a bit too lively. You're not on patrol, not yet. As the youngest page, your job is to carry the lantern behind the actual guard and pretend you're useful. Which honestly you're not, unless the enemy is allergic to adolescent body odor and fear. Your partner tonight is Sir Bertram's squire, a broad-shouldered teenager who smells like horse leather and bad decisions. He doesn't speak much except to complain about his saddle rash or his lady's cold letters. You nod dutifully, lantern swinging, as you try to keep up with his longer strides. The castle walls are slick with moss, the stones uneven, and your teeth chatter with every gust. The night watch is more boring than terrifying, except for the occasional owl scream that sounds like someone being flayed. Once a bat flew straight into your face. You screamed. Your squire lord laughed until he choked. You still haven't forgiven that bat. You pass the chapel tower and catch a glimpse of the reliquary inside a gleaming gold case said to hold the finger of St. Cuthbert. Or maybe it's his toe. Historians still argue whether most relics in Crusader castles were authentic or just holy fan fiction. Either way, nobody dares say so out loud. You cross yourself quickly, just in case. By the time the moon has crawled halfway across the sky, your legs feel like boiled turnips. At least you haven't tripped this time. Last week you fell into a barrel of salted fish. Your goose didn't look you in the eye for a whole day afterward. Finally blessed relief. You're relieved by another page barely older than you, but already missing a front tooth. He grunts, takes the lantern, and disappears into the blackness. You slink back to the servants' dormitory, a long, cold chamber, where every bed creaks and everyone snores like dying oxen. You slip under your scratchy blanket. Just as you start drifting off, someone lets loose the loudest fart known to medieval mankind. You're too tired to care. You manage a weak chuckle and fall asleep with a stupid grin on your face. Your dreams are bizarre. Something about jousting a bear and your goose wearing a helmet. Then thud. A wooden spoon cracks against the doorframe. Morning again. You groan. Muscles you didn't know existed scream in protest. Your next task is, of course, more cleaning. You're assigned to scrub the Lord's chamber pot. Again. You whisper a few curses under your breath, careful not to let the chapel boy hear. You trudge up the spiral stairs with the pot clutched at arm's length like a cursed artifact. The smell alone could qualify as a siege weapon. You dump it in the waste pit carefully to avoid splashback and rinse it with water so cold your hands burn. Back inside, you pass the tapestry room where nobles are being tutored. Latin mostly. You pause just long enough to catch a bit of declension practice, mouthing the words quietly. The priest catches your eye and raises an eyebrow, but he doesn't shoo you away. Maybe, just maybe, you'll be allowed to sit in someday. That is, if you survive till 15. You're pulled away to refill rushes in the Lord's Hall. The dried plants crunch underfoot and help soak up the daily mess of spilled wine and mystery goo. Some castles used lavender or sweet herbs, but yours, just dry grass and good intentions. That afternoon you're sent to muck the stables, because apparently your goose bit someone. She's got a temper, that bird. You're proud of her. While you shovel horse dung and dream of hot cider, a knight rides in with an arrow lodged in his thigh. Blood everywhere. You drop your shovel. Your brain says help, but your legs say flee. You end up frozen until the head stableman kicks you back to work. Later you find out the knight was ambushed 2 miles from the outer watchtower. It's a grim reminder. War isn't some romantic crusade. It's real and it's close. But for now, you still have to clean goose feathers out of the pantry. There's no such thing as a relaxing afternoon when you're the youngest page in a crusader castle. Just as you finish brushing goose feathers off the pantry floor for the second time, the steward finds you. His beady eyes narrow with suspicion, as if you've stolen time itself. The latrine trench needs stirring, he barks, as if that's a thing humans should have to do. You nod, and follow Soul, already halfway dead. The trench sits at the far end of the lower yard, cleverly positioned downhill from the kitchens. You approach it like a condemned man, wooden paddle in hand. The stink rises like a demon. You stir it slowly, gagging, muttering oaths that would scandalize your confessor. Why stir a trench full of human waste? Keeps it from crusting over, they say. Prevents plague, they claim. Historians still argue whether medieval sanitation efforts actually helped prevent disease, or just moved it around with a stick. You have your suspicions. By the time your stomach finishes rebelling, a bell rings from the upper courtyard. Visitors. This time it's not another bloodied knight or lost merchant. It's a traveling friar with an actual relic in tow. Supposedly the sandal of St. Peter. Or maybe it's just an old boot. Either way, everyone flocks to see it, which means you have to help set up benches and hang dusty banners in the main hall. The Lord himself appears, his chainmail gleaming beard neatly combed, probably by some unlucky page like you. He nods approvingly at the arrangement. You manage to stand straight, just in time to avoid getting mistaken for a sack of grain. The friar begins his sermon. You're technically supposed to be tending the hearth, but you sneak peeks. He talks about the Holy Land, the infidels, the burning sand, the call to purity and sacrifice. You wonder if it smells better over there. Doubtful. He holds up the sandal. It looks suspiciously like Brother Thomas's left shoe. You glance over at the monk, who's looking very uncomfortable. But nobody questions it. Faith, after all, is mostly about trust, and being too scared to say anything. After the sermon, the nobles donate coin, the soldiers mutter prayers, and the pages are sent to clean up after the refreshment feast. You carry a tray of bones and crusts back to the kitchen, where the cook is cursing loudly about burnt stews and lazy boys. You're not sure if he means the stew is lazy, or if he's yelling at you. Probably both. Back outside, you're tasked with refilling the water barrels. This means trudging down to the well, lowering the heavy bucket, waiting forever, then hauling it up with raw palms. Rinse and repeat. The pulley squeaks like a dying mouse every time. You daydream about inventing something better, a counterweight maybe, but the steward would probably just throw a broom at you. At dinner, you don't eat in the hall. You're too lowly for that. Pages eat in the servants' corridor, sitting cross-legged, with greasy fingers and hollow stares. Tonight it's barley stew again, with a surprise chunk of gristle. You chew quietly, listening to the muffled sounds of laughter and lute music coming from above. Just when you think the day is finally winding down, you hear it hoofbeats. Loud, fast, then shouts. The outer guards are yelling for the portcullis. You and a few other pages peek out the side gate. A rider bursts in, face streaked with dust and panic. Bandits, he shouts. 2 leagues south. The whole castle snaps awake. Bells ring, armor clanks, orders are shouted. You're immediately ordered to help haul extra bolts to the armory. You sprint, heart hammering. One by one you ferry wooden crates stacked with iron-tipped crossbow bolts up the narrow stairs. Each one is heavier than your hopes for a nap. The knights rush by faces grim. Even the Lord looks rattled. But the bandits never arrive. False alarm, or maybe they just changed their minds. Still, no one relaxes. You spend the rest of the evening polishing armor that might never see battle. There's something surreal about buffing chainmail while your goose naps on your boot. By the time you're finally dismissed, the castle is eerily quiet. Everyone's exhausted. You make your way back to your straw pallet arms, aching back, sore face smudged with ash and fear. Your goose honks once, then settles. You lie back and stare at the beams overhead. You're only 10 years old. You haven't seen the Holy Land. You haven't even been outside the walls in a week. But tonight you carried weapons, faced danger, and managed not to drop a single crate. That has to count for something. Sleep, of course, is never sacred. Not for the youngest page in a Crusader castle. Barely 2 hours after you close your eyes, a cold hand shakes your shoulder. You jolt awake, bonking heads with the stable boy. "Your turn at the wall, watch," he whispers, already retreating into the shadows like a guilty raccoon. You groan quietly, slip on your cloak, and shuffle out into the night. The stone steps leading to the ramparts are always colder at this hour, like they've been chewing on frost. Your torch sputters in the wind, but the stars are crisp, too crisp. They feel like they're judging you. You take your place between two slouching sentries. One's barely awake. The other's too awake, rambling about a vision he saw in the woods last week. It had glowing red eyes and wings like a goat, he says. You don't ask questions. This is the part of page life they don't tell stories about. Standing still in the dark, eyes stinging, trying not to nod off while holding a spear taller than you. The older boys get the fun jobs training with swords riding drills, cleaning blood from banners. You get wall duty because you're short, and can squeeze into the narrow turret if the alarm rings. You glance over the battlements. The countryside is silent. Rolling fields, some distant flickers of torchlight from a peasant cottage. But mostly, dark. Just dark. Historians still argue whether these watches were truly effective or mostly symbolic. But you're not paid to debate, actually. You're not paid at all. At dawn, you're relieved by another groggy page. You barely make it down the stairs before the bell rings for morning duties. Again. That feeling of sleep slipping away like a dropped pastry. Yeah, you know it too well. You're ordered to help with the morning prayers. That means scrubbing the chapel floor on your knees with a rag made from an old tunic that smells suspiciously like cabbage. The priest glides in like he owns the place. He probably does. You keep your eyes down and mouth shut, even when he complains about the inferior shine on the altar rail. The man's never touched a rag in his life. Breakfast is a small miracle, half a boiled egg, and a slice of bread you could use as a weapon. You chew slowly, trying to savor it until a clump of hay falls from the ceiling into your cup. You don't even bother fishing it out. Just drink around it. After prayers, you're summoned to serve in the solar, the Lord's private chamber. That means holding trays, fetching parchments, and pretending not to listen while he argues with his steward about grain shortages and how much cheese he owes to the neighboring baron. You nod a lot. You hope this counts as diplomacy training, but mostly it feels like being an animated coat rack. The solar itself is surprisingly warm, with glass windows, actual glass, and colored cloths draped along the walls. One tapestry shows St. George stabbing a dragon. You wonder if the dragon also had to do latrine duty. The Lord's daughter passes through. She's maybe 15, hair braided with little silver bells. She doesn't notice you, of course. You're part of the furniture. But you still straighten your tunic when she walks by, because let's face it, you haven't seen anything that clean in weeks. Then just as you think the morning might pass without humiliation, you're sent to the kitchen to fetch a jug of wine. A very specific jug of wine. The red one with the griffin crest. You have no idea which jug that is. You sprint through this pantry past the swearing cook and scan the shelves. There are jugs. Many jugs. No griffins. You pick the one that looks oldest and hope for the best. Back in the solar, the Lord takes one sniff, scowls, and mutters something about the vinegar bin. You freeze. He waves you off, dismissing you with the flick of a ring-heavy hand. You back out of the room so fast you almost trip over your own goose. Yes, she followed you again. She has no sense of protocol. You hide in the stables for a while, pretending to brush a mule. The stablemaster grunts in your direction, clearly aware you're just loitering, but he lets it slide. Probably because he remembers what it was like to be the lowest rung on the ladder, where even geese have more authority than you. Eventually, someone calls for water. Someone always calls for water. You sigh, pick up a bucket, and trudge to the well again. The pulley squeaks in welcome. It's barely midday. You start to lose track of the days, but the bruises on your shins keep a very accurate calendar. This afternoon, you're assigned to sparring practice with the other pages. Sounds exciting until you realize your partner is a 13-year-old boy named Gerard, who hits like an angry mule and smells worse than one. You're given wooden swords, but yours has a splinter the size of a fishbone, right where your thumb wraps around. The training yard is hot and packed. Dust clings to your hair, your lips the inside of your tunic. The knight in charge of drills shouts encouragement with all the warmth of a sandblaster. "Faster worms," he bellows. "If you die in practice, at least you'll save me time in war." You try to block a strike from Gerard. Fail. Your left elbow reminds you very loudly that bones are mortal. Your stance is sloppy, your legs are tired from wall duty, and your stomach is still growling from breakfast hay tea. You swing anyway. You miss. Gerard naturally lands a blow on your thigh, and it echoes like someone slapping a side of beef. Historians still argue whether sparring with wooden weapons made much difference in actual combat readiness. You mumble to yourself while limping backward. Gerard swings again. You dodge. Barely. After 3 rounds of bruises and bruised pride, the drill master dismisses you to the shade. You collapse by a barrel of lukewarm water, dip your face in, and drink directly from your palms. One of the older pages laughs. "You look like a boiled turnip," he says affectionately. "That's the nicest thing anyone said to you all week." You're not just learning swordplay. You're also learning how to polish armor fit chainmail correctly. And worst of all, how to scrape rust off helmets with a rag soaked in vinegar. The smell clings to your hands for days. One boy tried using lavender to cover it, ended up with a rash that made him look like a medieval pox illustration. Some days you're told to help maintain the training dummies. These are essentially burlap sacks stuffed with straw and set on posts. They wear old bits of armor and occasionally sport crude charcoal faces, usually with lopsided grins and one eye. You relate to them deeply. They stand in the sun all day, getting whacked, and never complain. Solid role models. Then comes your next trial, muck pit cleaning. Apparently someone's goat got into the pig enclosure, panicked, and did unmentionable things to the compost pile. Guess who's volunteered to fix it? You. Of course it's you. Armed with only a shovel and an increasingly flimsy pair of boots, you spend the next hour ankle-deep in a stew of mud straw and barnyard betrayal. Your goose watches from a fence post. Judging you, she flaps her wings once mockingly, then waddles off to bother the kitchen. Later, your march to the castle's small library. Finally, a reprieve. Reading lessons with the chaplain. Except you're not reading today. You're copying. With ink and a quill. The chaplain sets a parchment in front of you and tells you to copy the Lord's Prayer in Latin. You do not speak Latin. You dip the quill, try your best, and end up with something that might summon demons instead of praising saints. The chaplain frowns but lets it go. You notice his own ink-stained hands shake when he holds the candle, probably from years of copying bad handwriting. Still, this is one of your favorite duties. The scriptorium smells of old paper and beeswax, and for once no one's yelling at you. You sit, you scratch, you concentrate. Your fingers cramp, but there's peace in it. Until someone knocks over the inkwell. It's always Gerard. Back in the courtyard, the sun is sliding lower. You're sent to deliver a message to the castle blacksmith. It's a simple job, cross the yard. Avoid the chickens, don't drop the parchment. You make it halfway before you're tackled by a dog. He thinks you're playing fetch. You lose the parchment. You wrestle it back only slightly damp, and arrive at the forge covered in slobber and pride. The blacksmith barely grunts. He reads the message, nods once, then waves you off. You suspect he remembers your name, but chooses not to. That's fair. You only remember his by the enormous scar across his left forearm, and the way he always hums sad songs while hammering steel. By evening, you've been run ragged. Again. You crawl into your sleeping space, nothing more than straw in a corner of the servants' hall, and try to peel off your tunic without waking your goose. She's already asleep on your pillow. Classic. The stars are out again, and you can hear the sentries switching shifts. You might have a few hours before someone shouts your name again. You dare to close your eyes. You wake to the sound of bells. Not soft musical bells. No, these are the giant iron ones from the chapel tower. The kind that hit your skull like a frying pan full of regret. It's not even light out yet. You groan. Your goose honks. She's already up and trying to chew your laces. A knight has died. Not in battle. Nothing that dramatic. He fell off his horse after too much wine and a misguided attempt to joust a weather vane. That means a funeral. And guess who gets to polish every piece of ceremonial armor in the halls? You. You trudge down the spiral stairs with your bucket of sand and oil, your goose waddling behind, like your assistant. And you spend the next 3 hours making dead man's boots gleam. Historians still argue whether medieval funeral rites were more about honoring the dead or intimidating the living. With all this polish and fanfare, you're leaning toward intimidation. The funeral procession includes chanting incense and an endless line of squires carrying banners. You stand off to the side with the other pages in stiff tunics and stiff expressions. The dead knight's helmet rests atop the coffin, and his sword is tucked beside him, as if he might rise up later and need it. One of the older pages leans over and whispers. They say if your soul isn't clean, the sword turns to rust before they lower the coffin. You nod solemnly. Then he adds, "Want to bet 5 coppers?" It happens. You lose 5 coppers. The sword gleams defiantly. The knight was apparently less sinful than everyone assumed. After the burial, the pages help clean the chapel. You're assigned the task of scraping melted wax off the altar. It's meditative. You wonder how much of your young life will be spent scraping things: wax, rust, horse dung, dried egg from plates failed dreams. All the classics. Once that's over, you're finally given an afternoon off. This, of course, means only mildly supervised work. You and a few other pages are sent to gather firewood from the nearby grove. The fresh air is nice. No shouting. No rotten food. Just trees' birdsong, and the knowledge that any minute you could be eaten by wolves. Because yes, Crusader castles were often built in relatively hostile regions, and wolves were a real problem. Historians still argue whether medieval boys exaggerated wolf attacks, but the claw marks on some old logs say otherwise. You break sticks, you tie bundles, you race another boy to see who can carry the most without dropping any. Your goose follows along honking every time someone stumbles. You're pretty sure she thinks she's in charge. You kind of agree. On the way back, you hear a horn. One long, low note. Visitors. Nobles from another region likely. That means a feast, and for you a lot more work. Still, a feast usually means better scraps in the kitchen. Hope flickers in your chest. Back in the castle, it's a blur of activity. You help set long wooden tables. You polish spoons that haven't seen soap since last Michaelmas. You deliver wine jugs and somehow avoid spilling on any highborn shoes. The kitchen is chaos. 2 stews, a roasted boar, and what might be a swan stuffed with another swan. One of the nobles passes by and pats your head. "Awfully young to be working, aren't you?" He chuckles. You nod politely while thinking, "Sir, I've seen things." The feast begins. You're not allowed to sit, of course. You stand nearby ready to run errands, or clean messes, or refill mugs. One knight sings a love song to his meat pie. Another tries to duel a curtain because he thought it insulted his boots. It's pure pageantry and poor decisions. Later you get your scraps, a bit of venison, 2 mouthfuls of bread, and a piece of something that might once have been a carrot. You devour it with the speed and grace of a feral cat. Eventually the guests stagger to their sleeping chambers, or collapse under the tables. You sweep crumbs, collect goblets, and try not to step on the noble who passed out in the fireplace. As you're cleaning, the steward claps a hand on your shoulder. "Good work today," he says. "Tomorrow you start learning horsemanship." You blink, then smile. That's a big deal. Pages don't just get horses, they earn horses. Sure, it probably means cleaning hooves and being thrown into mud for months, but still you're moving up. You make your way back to your straw pile, passing torchlit stone walls, half-sung hymns, and the sound of your goose having an argument with a broom. You lie down. You ache. You itch. But somewhere deep down you feel almost proud. You survived another day. You wake to the sound of someone retching. Somewhere down the corridor, one of last night's noble guests is loudly discovering the consequences of his 5th mug of honeyed wine. You smile into your blanket. It's the little victories. Today your bones feel heavier. Not from one specific thing, but the accumulation of chores, scrubbing bad shoes, colder than expected nights, and that time you accidentally drank watered-down vinegar, thinking it was cider. Crusader castles don't offer rest days. You're summoned to the stables, and your pulse quickens. Horsemanship training. You've dreamed of this. Of galloping through open fields like a knight, your cloak flapping heroically behind you. Instead, you spend 20 minutes trying to coax a very flatulent donkey named Hubert out of a trough. The stablemaster, a leathery man with one eyebrow and no patience, watches you struggle. He only responds to singing. He finally grunts. You hum tunelessly. Hubert farts in agreement and waddles out. One mainstream historical fact: the youngest pages in Crusader castles did in fact start their horse training early, but it wasn't all glorious riding. Much of it was cleaning stalls, hauling feed, and getting kicked in the kneecaps. Scholars still debate whether boys truly mastered equestrian arts by age 14, or if that's just what they claimed in adulthood. You muck stalls. You learn to tighten saddle straps. You get bitten by a pony. Twice. You learn that hold the reins gently means don't let go, unless you want to chase a horse through 3 vegetable gardens. Still, something shifts. You start to recognize the way the horses flick their ears when they're nervous. You feel a weird sort of kinship with a mare named Buttercup, who hates everyone but lets you braid her tail. She's basically you, but with better hair. That night after evening prayers, the steward catches you yawning. "Don't fall asleep just yet," he says. "You're on latrine duty." And there it is. Your dreams of becoming a heroic knight come screeching to a halt at the base of a very smelly pit. You head down the dark corridor with a torch and a bucket of lime, your goose following behind, like she's attending a royal funeral. You hold your breath. You try to think of something else, anything else. Here's a quirky little historical tidbit: latrine pits in medieval castles weren't just gross, they were sometimes used to dispose of secrets. As in old letters, cursed objects, and once supposedly a bishop's stolen ring. Historians still argue whether that ring ever existed, or if it was just something a guilty page made up to avoid punishment. You dump the lime gag quietly and trudge back up into the light. You pass the chapel, where candles flicker and soft voices murmur Latin. You catch the scent of beeswax and damp stone, and for a moment, just a moment, it all feels strangely peaceful. Later in the boys' dormitory, you lie under your blanket, your limbs aching, but your mind too wired to sleep. One of the other pages whispers across the room, "Do you think we'll ever be knights?" You think about it. About the long days, the raw hands, the constant chance of being slapped by a noble or a goat. And still you nod. Yeah, maybe not today, but someday. The others hum their agreement. Someone starts softly whistling the dumb melody from the feast last week. Your goose settles beside you, head tucked under wing, occasionally twitching like she's dreaming of chasing swans. Your eyes drift closed. And for all the muck and misery, for all the sour bread, freezing feet, and flatulent donkeys, there's something honest about it. You're learning. You're growing. You're surviving. And in a place like this, That's no small thing, and now the fire burns low. The castle stones grow quiet. The torches flicker like sleepy eyes, and the long corridors echo only the soft shuffle of distant footsteps. You lie beneath your rough wool blanket, the straw beneath you, crackling gently, your fingers still carrying the warmth of the day's labor. Outside, the wind brushes the high towers, whispering secrets through the arrow slits. Your goose lets out one final sleepy honk, barely more than a sigh. And then all is still. You made it through one more day in a world carved from stone sweat and whispered prayers. And as your breath slows, and your limbs finally relax, remember, even in the harshest places, even as the youngest page in a castle of warriors, there is room to dream, to grow, to quietly endure. Sleep well now. The castle keeps its watch. Sweet dreams. Hey guys, tonight we climb up narrow, creaky wooden stairs into the looming bell tower of a 13th century church, where your day begins before dawn's first light. Imagine the chill biting through your threadbare clothes as you haul thick, tangled ropes in near darkness, your breath misting in the frosty air. The massive iron bell above you waits, ready to shake the whole village awake, and you know one slip could mean a broken neck or worse. You probably won't survive this job long, but hey, that's medieval life for you. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments. Let's see who's pulling a late or early shift right now. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge up the spiraling stairs leading to the belfry, a claustrophobic climb lined with spider webs and dust. This is your domain now, where the scent of old wood and cold stone wraps around you like a shroud. The bell itself hangs heavy and ominous, cast from iron, weighing anywhere from a few hundred to over 1,000 pounds, your job. Pull the ropes attached to its clapper, or the bell's swinging yoke, setting it in motion, to summon worshippers, mark hours, or ring alarm in times of trouble. Dawn is not your friend. Your body protests every movement, muscles still stiff from sleeping on hard church benches or in a drafty cell. The air is sharp with cold, sometimes coated with frost, that crunches beneath your worn boots. You're expected to be punctual to the minute, signaling the start of prayers or mass at precisely the right time. Medieval churches took their bells seriously, considering them the voice of God on earth, but you're just the loudmouth making that voice heard. Historically, bell ringing in the 13th century was mostly manual, no pulleys or counterweights, as refined as in later centuries. You're relying on brute strength and precise timing. There's no room for error. Miss a chime or ring too long, and the whole village grumbles. Oddly enough, the origin of church bells dates back centuries before, but the 13th century saw a huge spike in their importance and number as towns grew and the church's influence tightened. A quirky fact, some bell towers had primitive ringers' clocks carved into the wood near the ropes, with marks to remind you when to start or stop ringing. But these clocks were about as accurate as a sundial on a cloudy day, so mostly you relied on your own internal sense of time. No watches here, just the slow crawl of shadows and your own muscle memory. Historians still argue whether bell ringers were officially church employees or just local volunteers. There's evidence for both. Some records show wages, but others hint you might be doing this for free, or just in exchange for food and a warm corner near the hearth. So while the bells tolled for everyone, you were often the invisible voice behind them, unseen and underappreciated. And yes, the climb itself was treacherous. Those stairs often twisted steeply around the tower's stone core, worn slick by centuries of boots. One misstep meant a fall down a dark shaft. The rope systems were rough, made of hemp, and prone to fraying, so your hands were raw by midday. And because you rang multiple bells sometimes, you needed to coordinate like a one-person orchestra, keeping rhythm steady so the town's daily cadence didn't go haywire. By the time the sun rose, your breath was steaming in the cold air, your muscles aching, and your clothes soaked with sweat. But the day had only just begun. In the bell tower, the dawn ritual was just the start of a long, loud, and often lonely shift. The moment you think the climb was your only challenge, you realize the bell tower is more like a medieval wildlife sanctuary for bats, rats, and other unwelcome guests who've made it their home. As you wrestle with the ropes and bells, you share the cramped space with these creepy squatters who seem as irritable as you are at 5 a.m. Bats hang upside down in the rafters, occasionally fluttering down to inspect your nose or the worn edges of your gloves. Their droppings, called guano, coat the wooden beams in a pungent, powdery mess that makes the air thick and dusty. You cough more times than you can count, and there's no way to avoid it. No medieval vacuum cleaner for this gig. Rats are even less polite, darting across the floorboards in sudden bursts of motion, squeaking like they own the place. Their teeth have gnawed through ropes, before sometimes forcing last-minute repairs that add to your misery. Here's a fringe tidbit. Some bell ringers reportedly used garlic or herbs to try and keep the bats and rats at bay, though these natural repellents probably worked about as well as shouting at a thunderstorm. Others claimed that ringing the bells themselves kept the bats awake and unsettled, driving them away, an accidental pest control method. Whether that actually helped is up for debate. Historians still argue whether these creatures were seen as a nuisance to be managed or a part of the tower's natural ecosystem that ringers grudgingly accepted. Your hands, already raw from tugging ropes, now have to fend off creepy crawlies too. Spider webs cling to your face and hair, and the occasional moth flaps wildly against your cheeks, making your skin crawl. When night falls, it gets worse. Bats become active and squeak louder, and the rats seem to multiply. Despite the discomfort, the wildlife has become part of your daily rhythm. You learn to ignore the itchy bites and fluttering shadows, even finding odd companionship in the presence of these nocturnal neighbors. Some ringers told stories of friendly bats that seemed to guard the tower from evil spirits, a superstition that probably helped soothe frayed nerves during long vigils. And speaking of superstitions, bell towers were thought to be liminal spaces, places where the earthly and supernatural worlds touched. So it wasn't just the animals keeping you uneasy. Local folklore often blamed mysterious noises or creaks on ghosts or spirits trapped between worlds. Many ringers swore they heard strange whispers or footsteps when no one else was around, making the tower feel more like a haunted castle than a sacred space. Historically, church towers were designed primarily for function, not comfort. The presence of bats and rats was simply accepted after all, few people wanted to live up there permanently. The practicalities of ringing the bell trumped hygiene or creature control. It's a messy job, and your role was to tolerate the filth without complaint, lest the church elders think you weak or unworthy. Your relationship with the wildlife is a strange, uneasy truce. You may curse the rats for gnawing at ropes, or the bats for their persistent screeches, but without them, the tower would feel eerily empty, a hollow shell echoing only your lonely voice. Somehow, these creatures become your constant companions in the shadowy heights, reminding you that even in solitude, you're never truly alone. So as you yank on the ropes again, you're also swatting at an opportunistic moth, breathing in the sharp scent of bat guano, and trying not to think about what's lurking just beyond the dim candlelight. Welcome to the wild side of bell ringing. You might think the hardest part is climbing or fending off bats, but no. It's the sheer physical weight of the bell that makes your job a medieval CrossFit nightmare. These bells aren't just decorations. Some can tip the scales at over 1,000 pounds, suspended precariously above you, waiting for your hands to set them swinging with a powerful tug. Pulling the rope is no gentle task. You have to time your muscle bursts perfectly, matching the rhythm, so the bell swings freely without slamming violently against the wooden frame. One miscalculation, and the bell could swing too far, endangering the tower's structure or your own limbs. Remember, you're working with primitive equipment ropes made of coarse hemp, rough on your hands, and prone to fraying under stress. No gloves or protective gear for you. The strain isn't just physical, but a mental game too. After hours of hoisting that iron giant, your arms ache like they've been ground under a millstone. Your back protests every pull, and your legs quiver, trying to keep your balance on slippery floorboards. It's no surprise that bell ringers developed hardened hands with thick calluses, sometimes bleeding from tiny rope burns. They were the medieval equivalent of iron-pumping athletes, except their gym was a cramped, dusty tower, and their weights were deadly. Here's a quirky fact. In some regions, ringing a particularly heavy bell was considered a rite of passage, a test of strength that could earn you local respect, or at least a nod from the parish priest. Young men would train specifically for these moments, their pride tied to how long and how forcefully they could keep the bell swinging. This physical challenge gave bell ringing a community status beyond the sacred, almost like a medieval strongman contest. But this strength came with serious risk. Bell ringing accidents were surprisingly common. There are records of ringers crushed by their own bells, or falling to their deaths after losing grip on slippery ropes. One gruesome tale speaks of a bell that broke free and crashed through the tower's floor, though historians still argue whether this was a real event or an exaggerated legend meant to scare young ringers into caution. Despite all this, the bell's voice was the town's heartbeat, the call to prayer, the warning of danger, the joyous ring for weddings. You, the bell ringer, were the pulse behind this sound, the unsung athlete whose strength echoed across villages and fields. Working with such massive iron weights also meant working in a narrow space where one wrong move could end the shift or the shift would end you. The swinging bell was a giant pendulum, and your timing needed to be impeccable. Any hesitation or overpull might cause the bell to swing wildly, potentially damaging the tower or injuring yourself. Yet amid all this brute force, there was skill. Bell ringing wasn't just about strength. It was an art of rhythm and endurance. You had to keep the timing steady for hours, often changing patterns during different services or events. The best ringers were known for their stamina and precision, though ironically the church rarely rewarded them handsomely for their expertise. So next time you think bell ringing was a simple task, remember the sheer iron weight you had to master the risk of falling or injury, and the calloused hands that told a story of strength and sacrifice behind every toll. You'd think being the one who literally rings the voice of God would come with perks. Nope. Silence is far from golden when you're the church's bell ringer, and the role demands a weird mix of invisibility and perfect timing that few appreciate. You're the unseen puppeteer yanking ropes behind thick walls, making sure every chime hits the exact second. No early, no late, or the whole congregation's schedule collapses like a poorly built souffle. Your day is a blur of repetitive motions, pull, release, pull, release. You develop a sixth sense for timing, synced to the sun's slow crawl and the priest's chants. The bells have to mark canonical hours, the medieval church's way of slicing the day into prayer sessions, and missing one could be sacrilege, or worse, cause confusion among villagers relying on the bell's ring to time their own lives. Yet your work goes mostly unnoticed except by grumpy neighbors who complain the bells are too loud or start too early. You're often blamed for annoying the local market or waking babies. Ironically, the louder and more punctual you are, the more the town grumbles. Your existence is a paradox, essential but invisible, necessary but nuisance. Here's a quirky piece. Some bell ringers resorted to silent signals to communicate, like tapping the tower walls or using hand signs because the sound of the bells drowned out their voices. This secret code made them feel part of a mysterious brotherhood, even if no one else cared. Historians still argue whether bell ringers were considered lowly laborers or respected artisans. Church records rarely praised them, and their wages were often meager or irregular, but local tradition sometimes elevated the position, especially when it came to big festivals. Your job required skill and endurance, yet you were more often treated as a background noise, literally and socially. Unlike monks or priests, you weren't cloaked in robes or power. Instead, you were the dusty shadow sweaty palms, clutching ropes ignored by parishioners on their way in and out. Some bell towers even barred you from entering the main church during services, isolating you in your echo chamber. But silence is a fickle friend. You couldn't rest easy either, because the bell's voice demanded perfect rhythm. A missed beat or a wrong note meant you'd hear complaints not just from people, but from your own conscience. Your role was a constant balance of exertion and invisibility, a tough gig in a world where status often came with robes and Latin prayers, not rope burns and bruised muscles. So next time you hear a church bell, remember there was a person below. Maybe freezing, maybe cursing the ropes who made that sound, happen on time, every time, despite being the least thanked person in the building. Bell ringing wasn't just about pulling ropes. It was tangled up in the messy web of church politics and local power plays. You're stuck right in the middle, caught between priests, church wardens, and sometimes even noble families, all vying for control over the tower and its booming voice. It turns out that your humble job was more politically charged than you'd guess. The church bell was a symbol of authority. It announced important events, summoned people to mass, or warned of danger. Controlling when and how it rang was like controlling the town's heartbeat. Rival factions fought over who got to decide the ringing schedule, who maintained the tower, and even who hired or fired the bell ringer. You're a pawn in a game you barely understand, with tensions occasionally bubbling into heated arguments or petty sabotage. Here's an odd tidbit. Some bell ringers were hired by local guilds or wealthy patrons, rather than the church itself. This gave those groups influence over the bell's voice, sometimes using it to signal trade openings or celebrations exclusive to their members. The bell then became a tool of social power, ringing for some, but silencing others. Historians still argue whether bell ringers had any real agency in these conflicts, or were simply expendable employees shuffled between factions. Some documents suggest that experienced ringers gained favor and could negotiate better terms, while others depict them as easily replaced laborers. The truth likely varies from place to place, shaped by local politics and personalities. Imagine being caught between the vicar demanding strict schedules and the town council wanting the bell to chime for secular events. Your instructions might change weekly, leaving you confused and frustrated. Sometimes rival parties would issue conflicting orders, forcing you to pick sides or face consequences. This power struggle extended to the tower itself. Control over maintenance meant deciding whether the bell was well cared for or left to rust, a literal metaphor for who held sway in the community. If the ropes frayed or the bell cracked, fingers pointed, and you often took the blame regardless of the politics behind it. The rivalry even influenced superstition. Some believed that if the bell tower was neglected or the ringing mismanaged, it could anger divine forces or invite misfortune. So your role carried an invisible weight of spiritual responsibility layered on top of political tensions. Caught in this web, your life was less about faith and more about navigating a precarious job market of competing powers, each with their own agendas. You had to be careful who you trusted, who you pleased, and when to speak up or stay silent. Despite all this, your bells kept ringing a steady pulse through the noise of church politics. You were the unlikely heartbeat of a community's struggles, joys, and fears, though mostly no one noticed the toll it took on you. As daylight fades, the bell tower transforms into a realm of eerie quiet and creeping shadows, where your night watches become a test of endurance and nerves. The cold intensifies, wrapping around you like a damp shroud, and every creak in the old wooden beams sounds like footsteps from the beyond. You settle in for long hours of vigil gripping ropes and listening to the silence that's anything but peaceful. Night-ringing duties were a crucial but dreaded part of your job. Bells tolled for curfews, emergencies, or special ceremonies, meaning you had to be alert at all hours even when your body begged for rest. The darkness hides not just the village sleeping below, but also your own fears, and the ghost stories whispered by former ringers. Here's a quirky detail. Many bell ringers carried charms or small talismans to ward off evil spirits, believing the tower was a crossroads for the supernatural. Some kept iron nails or witch stones close by, hoping these objects would protect them during their lonely watches. It's unclear whether this was widespread or simply a few ringers clinging to superstition, but historians still argue how seriously these beliefs influenced daily duties. The ghost stories you hear aren't just idle tales. Many who worked the towers reported unexplained noises, whispers, footsteps, cold drafts, even fleeting shadows. Some claimed that the bells themselves held trapped souls, or that ringing them at certain hours could disturb restless spirits. Such stories kept you constantly on edge, your imagination filling the silence with unseen presences. Despite your fears, the night watch was part ritual, part survival. You learned to rely on the rhythm of the bells and your own breathing to stay grounded. Occasionally, you might glimpse a flicker of movement or hear a distant howl, reminding you that the world beyond the tower was alive with mysteries you couldn't control. Sleep was a luxury you seldom enjoyed. The tower's cold stone and narrow ledges offered little comfort, and the ropes demanded your attention. If a sudden alarm sounded fire invasion or plague, you were the first to respond, ringing the bells to summon help or warn of danger. Historians still debate whether these night vigils were primarily spiritual duties or practical necessities. But either way, they added an exhausting layer to your already demanding role. You weren't just a laborer. You were a guardian of the community's safety and beliefs, perched high above in isolation. By dawn, your muscles ached anew, your eyes heavy but alert. The line between reality and nightmare blurred as you descended the stairs, leaving the haunted tower behind until the next call to ring. Winter and festival seasons were your personal versions of medieval hell. Unforgiving weather and relentless schedules combining to test every ounce of your endurance. Imagine pulling on frozen ropes with numb fingers while icy wind slices through gaps in the stone tower. Snow piles around the base, making the climb slippery and treacherous. You're soaked from sleet teeth chattering, all while the village expects the bells to ring on time. No excuses. Storms made the tower a nightmare. Thunder shook the walls, lightning cast jagged shadows, and the bells ringing sometimes echoed like a battle cry against the storm itself. Yet you had to keep pulling no matter the weather, because the bells warned of danger and kept the community connected during the chaos. Festival seasons added a different kind of pressure. Long hours with little rest. Weddings, holy days, market openings, and feasts meant you were the soundtrack to celebration. Your arms screamed from non-stop ringing patterns that varied with each event. No medieval festival was complete without the bells announcing joy or solemnity, and you were the unacknowledged star. Here's a quirky fact. Some bell towers had designated ringing days during festivals, where villagers competed to see who could ring the bell fastest or most creatively, turning your grueling work into a bizarre kind of sport. These contests, part skill, part endurance, helped break the monotony, but probably just made your muscles hate you more. Historians still argue about how organized and regular bell-ringing schedules truly were during these times. Some suggest it was more spontaneous, depending on local customs and the ringer's discretion, while others believe strict protocols governed every chime. Either way, your job didn't get easier. Medieval clothing offered no protection against the cold, or rain. You'd wear layers of rough wool that soaked up moisture, making you colder. The tower had no heating, no comforts, just stone and wood to absorb your misery. And yet you had to be ready at a moment's notice, sometimes climbing the tower in the dead of night for an emergency bell toll. Despite all this, the community's reliance on your steady hands never wavered. The bells were their connection to time, safety, and celebration. You carried their hopes and fears in your tired arms, even if they barely spared a thought for the person behind the ropes. So brace yourself for storms, snow, and festival madness, all in a day's work for the medieval bell ringer, whose sacrifices rang out far louder than the bells themselves. By now you've endured frostbite, rodents, rope burns, and the politics of ecclesiastical power. And yet the bell ringer's story barely echoes in history's halls. Despite being the literal voice of the medieval church, you vanished into obscurity, your sacrifices unrecorded or forgotten. Why did such an essential role disappear from popular memory? Part of it lies in the shift of technology and society. As bells became mechanized and clock towers emerged, the need for a constant human presence lessened. Ringing bells transformed from a skillful taxing craft into a more automated routine. Your role was replaced by gears and weights, stripping the job of its physical demands, and ironically, its visibility. Here's a quirky thought. Some scholars suggest bell ringers might have been deliberately downplayed in records to keep church hierarchies unchallenged. After all, the louder the bell, the more attention it drew to the church's authority, but not to the sweaty laborer making it happen. It's a theory historians still debate fiercely. Furthermore, bell ringers were often seen as lower-class workers, overshadowed by priests and monks, whose lives were better documented. Their stories remained in local lore, or vanished entirely, leaving behind only faint echoes in parish records or folk tales. Still, the legacy of bell ringers lingers. Modern campanologists, bell experts, study ancient ringing methods, and some traditions survive in small communities. Your unseen hands set rhythms that shaped daily life from marking time to warning of invasions or fires. So while history may have forgotten your name, the echoes of your toil ring out in every toll of church bells today. You were the hidden heartbeat of medieval life, a paradox of presence and invisibility, strength and silence. Next time you hear a bell, remember the vanished figures who made that sound possible, swinging heavy ropes through the dark, battling rats and cold, bound by duty and obscurity. The tower's cold stone walls slowly fade from your mind as you lower the ropes. One last time, your body heavy with exhaustion, yet somehow lighter now that your story is told. Imagine the chill softening to a gentle warmth, the distant echo of bells melting into a peaceful hush. You're no longer trapped in that cramped, dusty space, but gently drifting away, the rough rope fibers replaced by soft threads of calm. Whatever trials you faced, bats wait cold, or ghosts, they've folded quietly into the night's embrace. The world moves on, but the rhythm you kept pulses softly beneath the surface, a heartbeat in history's vast silence. So rest easy now. Let the bells ring one final soothing note as your eyelids grow heavy and the world slips gently into dreams, sweet dreams.